In this episode, Katie and I discuss generative AI and its impact on both enterprises and UX. So, Katie, today we decided we talk about artificial intelligence, AI, Gen AI to be specific. I know there's a lot of people talking about it, but I think given your background and what you've been doing for the last year, you're uniquely qualified to talk to this. Do you want to tell our listeners kind of what your role is?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I work in an enterprise software company, right? Is kind of a general description of what we do. But I specifically work in our UX research team that's focused on generative AI experiences and AI products within those experiences. So we've been focused on AI products for a number of years. Actually, we're probably one of the only UX research teams out there that we're already working on this type of um, user research within our products and within these experiences. But when generative AI kind of started to gain a lot of steam and became of interest to a lot of our customers in the business, we took that on as well. So we've been working really hard on that, and I won't be going into a lot of detail right about our research there or necessarily what we found. But I completely agree with you, Andrew, that it's a really unique space to be in to have that enterprise view plus that generative AI piece. So I'm excited to talk a little more about this with you today and share some of that knowledge.
All right. And the first thing I thought we could cover is just a very high level, what, because you were doing AI machine learning before generative AI, took off with ChatGPT.
Right.
So, you were doing AI machine learning before generative AI. So I thought if you could just give us like a very high level, because there's lots of people going into the fine grain of it, if you could give us a very high level of what's AI, machine learning, and generative AI.
Totally. So this is the UX Katie version, right? Like you said, this is not the nitty gritty. There's tons of great resources out there if you're interested in that. But from our perspective, from just a really simple, straightforward perspective, we kind of look at it as traditional AI and then generative AI. So traditional AI is more what we were working in previously. This is where the AI can make decisions or perform tasks based on data prediction analysis. They're trained with a set of data and they follow set rules, right? So it's a lot more like pattern recognition. And this can be really valuable, as you can imagine, because there's a lot of repetitive tasks that people do in their daily work and they follow set patterns, right? And these are things that might be a good case for being these tasks being replaced by some sort of predictive model within artificial intelligence. But then we have generative AI. Generative AI is different because, like the name implies, it creates things, right? So it's not necessarily as dependent on set rules or set patterns. It can create new outputs based on whatever various input of data you give it. So it can be still on prescribed data sets, but it can actually create things based on that. So it's not just training it on a set predictive path, right, or a set of analysis. So it has looser rules, right? Is kind of the bottom line, right? Traditional AI much more rule based. Generative AI much looser set of rules, a lot more potential for the AI to actually create new things and not just follow a certain pattern.
All right, thanks. And I thought we could like rewind the clock. So you were doing AI machine learning and ChatGPT happened. So what was your first reaction, in those initial days of generative AI kind of taking off?
I'll be honest, I was pretty worried, a little worried, very worried. It was stressful for us, right? For a number of reasons. First, because we knew that this was going to generate a lot of interest from people who maybe previously hadn't had as much experience with AI, maybe didn't know what some of the challenges around AI that users have in general. And so we knew that it was going to generate a lot of buzz, but we also knew that this could really add another layer of challenges for our users, right? We already know adoption is challenging for users of AI technologies, and now we're throwing something new into the mix that has a lot more unpredictable power than some of what we've previously seen. So it made me a little nervous, but it also made me really excited because I think this is a really unique moment in time, especially as someone in the UX field, to really impact, right, how users are interacting with this new technology and really make sure, right, that we're using it in a meaningful way and not just for fun. So I think those are kind of the two emotions, right? Is like worry, a little bit of nervousness, just kind of feeling overwhelmed, but also being really excited to be part of this time period as a UX practitioner. I'm curious, Andrew, what was your kind of reaction and feeling when you first started to see things like ChatGPT gaining steam in the news?
Yeah. So for me, you know, I was just thinking of like some robots and stuff out there that, have the uncanny valley. And I was thinking like, oh, this is hype basically. And
Yeah,
then I went and actually got on ChatGPT and the image version where you could generate images and start playing around. And this will give us a little insight to our listeners. Like we started recording a year ago. This is our first time recording this year. So a year ago, I sat down and I was actually using it to generate ideas of logos for our podcast. And I was like, this is really cool. I put like Andy Warhol style vodcast. I mean, obviously, I didn't adopt these images into the style, but like it could mimic. And to me, the graphic part was pretty cool. But then you get into the text, and to me, the text has a lot of applications. So I became a fan pretty fast, but I wouldn't say like I say my initial reaction was skeptical.
right.
And if thinking of diffusion of innovation, I had to have that social proof. So I was not on the innovators and early adopters necessarily. But once, and I think that's the power and why it became so big so fast is because anybody, the way that they rolled out ChatGPT is anybody could get on there and like see the value instantly or play around. And so that's I think what was helped it all take off. So yeah,
Yeah.
initially skeptical, but then I started thinking too. Like when I played it with it, not only did I see the value, but I started also thinking about like, okay, is this how big of a disruptive technology is this? Right? If you look back in past, we have like iPhone, but not to date myself, but I remember going from analog to digital and the internet and web. And so, I was trying to, I don't know if there's a good barometer or anything out there on where exactly it is, but I definitely feel like it's a bigger shift. And I think a lot of people in the world echo that. But that's kind of my initial thoughts. Whereas like I was trying to figure out, I always like to measure, and we'll talk about like metrics and things like that all the time because it's how do we measure our improvement or whatever. So in this case, I immediately went to how do we measure this against the internet and going digital, and how do you measure against like iPhone and other things like that kind of disrupted stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree with the idea that uh, it was like something about it feeling so accessible and easy to use for people that triggered all these other kind of emotions for us in this field and working with the kind of technology we work with. I mean, it's both exciting and scary, right? It's the same sort of thing we
Mm-hmm.
talk about when we talk about search, right? In an enterprise context, because everybody's used to Google, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they come to enterprise search, whatever your enterprise might be using, whatever version, and they have these expectations. And so as soon as ChatGPT became popular, right, that was where my mind was going and where we were seeing things start to change is that people are now going to come to these AI experiences and they're going to have expectations. Whereas before, maybe they didn't have expectations or they didn't have enough experience to even think that would work a certain way. So it's both exciting and, like you said, something to be a little skeptical of.
All right. So, Katie, the next question is, as a UX researcher familiar with enterprise, pain points and experiences, what are you most excited about with generative AI?
I think there's a couple layers, right, of the excitement. I think the first thing from a very practical standpoint, and really, like you said, understanding the pay points of our users in the enterprise space. It's just that there is a lot of time savings potential, I think, especially for mundane or repetitive tasks, or for, I think, the potential of tasks to increase in productivity or quality, right, or value. Even something as simple as grammatical checks on an email, right, or changing the tone of something to better fit your use case. All those things feel really productive and meaningful. And I think that that's exciting and meaningful to employees, right, in the enterprise space. So I think there's that piece. I think from a psychology perspective, I'm also excited about the idea that our users in the enterprise space are going to have a change in how they make decisions. So there's going to be this addition of technology to help them make decisions in the workplace, or to accept, reject, right, certain notions or things that they might come across. And as long as they can trust that technology as a partner, right, in the work that they're doing, that could be really exciting and meaningful to see them elevate their work, right? Grow, in their craft, whatever that craft may be. And I think that's something that we need to, keep an eye out for and could be really exciting as well. So I think those are like the two areas I'm most excited about. And happy to dive in a little deeper too on maybe some of the personas that I think could benefit the most.
Yeah, and so my answer to that question was a little different. I do have like time savings, from the user perspective, getting help faster, decisions faster, and augmenting their job. But the other thing I had was really about data quality. So, and one of the
Yeah.
things that I get excited about, that I got an early preview of your work until it could go public. I just had to sit there and squirm. But I had to do with like summative data for help desk. And I got really excited about that because to me, it's not just summative data for like those cases and stuff. It's that summative data, now you have better data. And when you have better data, like whether it's generative AI or just normal AI or statistics or whatever, you can find intent in that data and basically make better decisions. So it's almost like a two-layer approach. Like you get summative, you get better quality case notes, resolution, what happened, because the people are. And just to cover real quick, the summative is it takes the phone call or whatever, and it helps the person closing the case write out what happened, right? Write out the field. And so that gets saved in the database. And so to me, better quality write up with like what steps were taken, what resolution. I mean, to me, that gets to the point where once you have that data, you can then make better decisions after that. And maybe, if you were to apply generative AI on top of that, maybe you could say, hey, generative AI, write me the best, like KB articles for the top 10 call drivers, and just, see what happens kind of deal. But to me, that's the big deal is like better quality data means, everything that we talk about with user experience and user research, it's all data to drive decisions. So I always look at it
Right.
through that lens of how is this going to help us make decisions? And so to me, like there's just tons of possibilities out there. And that's just one example.
Totally. And I think anyone who's listening in that works with users in that help desk setting, customer service, right? Agent personas, that whole grouping of people helping other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And needing to like sift through a lot of information and like track things and have, the SLAs, right? Service level agreements. Like I think anyone listening, right, gets excited, right? When you think about the possibilities there, because we know that those users are some of the users that could benefit the most from having their pain points addressed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when these like simple, challenging or irritating really like tasks get kind of moved out of the way or simplified or improved, that's when they can really focus on other aspects of their job that can really deliver that next level of customer experience. Right. So it's all connected. And I think I think that is why people have gotten so excited about how generative AI can apply in that enterprise setting, and why it's one of the most talked about, use cases out there.
Yeah, and just to throw some other examples out there that just my mind goes to, and just for the listeners out there, I'm not part of creating generative AI at any company. I just get excited about using it. But like some of the things I go into is like if you have a project team and you do retrospectives, what worked well, what didn't work well, and you start gathering that in a database or in some sort of data format, and then again finding those intents, those ways to improve, looking holistically. So I think of that. Um, oh, the other thing that I saw an example of recently is employee survey data, right? The open
Mm,
field comments and stuff. And if you could kind of feed it through, use that as a uh, data repository for generative AI, finding your intents and getting suggestions. So to me, you got the summative case. You could have your project team doing retrospectives, and then you also have your employee engagement. So those are like three examples. One that I know exists today, and the other two that either I've heard people doing the employee survey thing already, um, or something like that.
and yeah, I think to kind of sum it up, right? Like some of the biggest use cases that make us excited. It's like it's the things where it can save people from doing repetitive, mundane tasks, right? It's where they can elevate their own work through the use of generative AI. Whether that be in improving, grammar or the story they're trying to tell within a written piece of text or imagery. Getting data, right, understood more easily and accessible, right? That's another big piece of it. Finding things more quickly. All these things, right, like are the things that are pain points that have like long plagued enterprise users, right? The employees, right, of these companies. And they all have the potential to be addressed by generative AI. So I think that's, I know something that makes us excited. I'm curious, Andrew, like, is there anything that you've seen in working with enterprise customers a lot? I know you don't work directly in generative AI products, but something that you've worked with your customers a lot that makes you excited about where we're headed.
Yeah. So even though I don't, I mean, it's out there. I recently, did a AI ethics training with a company, because I'm consulting with them, and they have a governance board, which I think is awesome, right? So I think some people
Great.
on the project are like, oh yeah, we got to go through this governance board, and for me, I'm just a nerd, so I think it's cool. And I'm just sitting there absorbing, looking at their training, looking at okay, how I want to know what's their they cover their criteria a little bit in the training, and I'm just excited to kind of actually go through the process and see. So that's pretty cool, but it also brings up the fact that you need maybe some governance around this technology,
You sure
and
do.
think about it
Yeah.
ethically. Oh yeah. So the other thing I think is cool is that it is so mainstream, right? This isn't an little AI
Right.
machine learning before was kind of this enigma, thing, and people I think expected more from it, more what they get with generative
Yeah.
AI than what they were getting with AI machine learning. And so now they're actually maybe the promise of this AI is being fulfilled a little better. And what's cool about that is when it becomes mainstream, more people are thinking about it, more ideas, and then of course a lot more investment. So we're seeing a rapid rate of development and solutions and stuff out there. I mean, you can't throw a stone and not hit an AI solution. Um, so I think that's pretty cool. But I also think, call me biased, but I think it brings in more need for for the end user research. Yeah, so I think the cool thing is it makes our jobs more important because now we have to represent people more because everyone's going to be relying on generative AI more, and everything we do is there to serve people and help decisions from people. You can't remove the human element from a company. You know, so I think it just adds a spotlight more onto UX and how to incorporate the ethics and everything in there. All right. So, Katie, what are you most cautious about? Like, what are some things that you're tracking and you know you see as a potential issue with generative AI?
The biggest thing, and this is consistent whether we're talking about AI, machine learning, or generative AI, is trust, right? Trust is the underlying foundation for success with any use of AI technology by humans, right? It is the core element of designing AI with humans in the center of that, right? Human-centered AI. If we don't get a proper and appropriate level of trust from humans to that AI experience, it's not going to reach that potential value that we were just talking about, and I'm so excited about, right? So there's a lot of ways that we can build trust, but when I say appropriate level of trust, it's really important too that humans don't put too much reliance into AI, because that can also be dangerous. And wrapped up in this whole very human experience of trust, right, with a technology are a lot of ethical considerations and questions. And so it's great that that company you've been consulting with, right, has a governance committee, has, some thought and framework around how they want AIs to be used in their company and with their employees. It's really important for companies and creators to take steps to create responsible AI. And there's a number of different ways that that can be achieved, but I would say the most important thing is to have guardrails in place, right, for problems that may arise. Hopefully they don't, but it's very much something that could happen. And so having those guardrails in place, right, building trust, making sure it's transparent when AI is being used. There's a host of things, right, that we recommend to really make sure that those experiences are ethical, responsible, right, and trustworthy. So those are the things that concern me at a high level, and I think there are a lot of people out there, right, speaking out to this and really trying to help um, UX practitioners, right, like ourselves, but also companies on a large scale understand how to achieve this, right, because it's not easy.
Yeah, and what would you say? You said it. To build that trust. So, what are some untrustworthy things from generative AI that you're tackling right now?
Yeah, I think just at a high level, and I know even people outside of enterprise experiences would see this. But some things at a high level is like when we try to be too clever with the AI, right? And we make it difficult for the end user to tell whether or not they're working with an AI. Um,
Okay.
People don't like that, right? We want it to be very transparent that you're interacting with an AI, and you also want to be able to give feedback to the AI, right? So you want to create a feedback loop, right? Just like we do in other forms of experience, right? We want to actually have a feedback loop with the AI so that it can get better. And so that the humans who are monitoring that technology on the other side have the ability to track and make sure that that AI isn't going off the rails, right?
Yeah.
Isn't
What
giving
about
totally crazy things.
right? And when it goes off the rails, right, and it makes things up, right? Isn't that one of
Right.
the trust issues?
Totally. They call it hallucinations, right? I think the thing to remember is AI is kind of making things up anyway, right? Especially generative AI. That's the whole point. It's generating based on whatever data input it has. So even when you think about the data that the AI has access to, you need to be thinking about how to make that an ethical source of data, right? And responsible in terms of how diverse is it? How thoughtfully arranged was it? Where did you get it from? And then for UX practitioners specifically, right? We also have to think about how does this experience impact people of a variety of backgrounds, right?
Yep.
is this is this suitable for them? So you can't just, pick 5 users off of, a platform, right, where they're providing users to you for compensation and call it good. You have to be really mindful that the users who you're bringing to these experiences are representative of the users in your population.
Right? So I put down the hallucinations. That's why I was prompting you there, because I think that's, I put down that it can give bad results, right?
Yeah,
Right. How it is now, it can, it thinks this is right, and it's trying to give you, it's trying to fulfill your command or your prompt,
right.
but it can actually make some stuff up, which isn't very good for decision making. If it's made on bad data. The other thing
Right.
I was
And
thinking of,
I think, oh, sorry, just one point on that too, Andrew, like, because it's such a good point you brought up. I think the other thing too is that people have to realize the AI is making things up or that it's not telling them something truthful. People assume, right, that when they're interacting with an AI, they're just going to know if something is false. But if you're talking about a company policy or something that you're already not familiar with and it hallucinates an answer, that could be really detrimental, right? Depending on what kind of policy it is.
yeah, and the other thing that it made me think of is I got really excited about Amazon summative reviews.
Yes.
But then I started thinking about it deeper, and I realized like it's not telling me how many were paid promotion like type reviews. Like, those are going to trend higher, and might, we get one. And so like I think I wrote a little LinkedIn post that's saying like, hey, it'd be better show us like a summary of 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, 4 star, 5 star. Because that gives you a more holistic look, because you might have, or see if you can filter out paid promotion type reviews. So to me, there's a trustworthiness there based on the data as well. And that leads me to another thing, which is about data. And when you're putting stuff into ChatGPT, you and I were talking the other day, and you're like, be careful, don't put your proprietary data in there, right? You talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think people get excited, right, by what things like ChatGPT can do, and they don't realize that they're putting it out into the open ether, right? And so there are um, companies, right, that are using generative AI technology and they're putting safeguards in place so that that data can't be consumed and reused in ways that it wasn't intended to be used. But if you're just like a UX researcher out there and you're just like, man, this chat GPT thing is cool. I'm going to drop my survey data in there and have it analyze it for me. How cool is that? It is cool. But if there's proprietary data in there, right, you're setting yourself up for a potentially serious situation.
Right. If it's free, you are the product, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm curious if you're seeing the trend too, but I've seen, some companies creating their own internal generative AI so they can protect their proprietary data and give people the ability to use generative AI, but without, that data leakage.
So I'm seeing a lot of trends right out there where companies are investigating a variety of generative AI tools. And like you said, some of them end up making their own, right? Which is sort of a fun trend we see in enterprise anyway, right? Anytime some new technology comes out. But they're really playing with those different technologies to determine like can their needs be met for their specific use cases while still be getting the reassurance, right, that their data is going to be protected. But in the meantime, they are dealing with um, their employees having an interest in ChatGPT, right, and similar technologies that are free and open source out there already, and trying to get that message right across to them that hey, like you have to be careful with this stuff, right? Don't put company data in there. Be careful copying pasting emails into this outside thing, right? So while they're trying to keep up with the technology and not have this fear of missing out, they're also trying to manage this huge shift, right, in how people are already beginning to work. So it's really quite interesting to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, just, I always like to make, relation to something in the past, right? And for me, it's like, okay, people started, companies had on-prem data centers, right? And,
Mm,
cloud providers had to provide a level of trust and SLAs and stuff, to get, and even today that's still going on. Like, okay, where's my data going? Those discussions are still happening, but you see people, we're now a lot of cloud-based, servers and SaaS and stuff like that, moving from the on-prem out. So to me, it's like, we're in that beginning stage of generative AI, and those guardrails and those assurances, maybe they're getting set up and I'm just not aware, but it's not to a point of trust where a company is like, yeah, let me send you like let all my users paste their data, their proprietary data in your data source, right? So that's what it
Yeah.
makes me think of.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge level of risk that these people have to assess and understand. And, like we mentioned earlier, I mean, one of the best steps to mitigating that risk is having a governance committee, right? Or
Mhm.
having a code of responsible AI ethics within your own company, and working with your vendors, right? Or your internal service providers to make sure that everybody's on the same page of that.
Yeah, and I was thinking from like B2B, like if you are providing generative AI as your business, right?
Yeah.
That's what they have to do is set up that trust or like even data stores and protected data stores or something. Something for
Yeah.
the enterprise, folks to think about like making sure exists if they're looking at doing it that way. Last question, Katie. What do you think UXers need to know about generative AI for their jobs? And what about also non UXers? If there is there anything else or anything different they would need to know?
Yeah, my biggest thing for both groups of people is that AI and generative AI are not appropriate for every use case that you have. It's not a solution for every problem, and especially with the hype and interest around generative AI and like the excitement that people want to use it and feel that they can use it, you really have to take on that responsibility to make sure that this is actually something that's going to create a better experience for your user. So it sometimes stinks, right, to be that person who has to say, like, I don't think this is cool, but this is not going to solve our problem, right? Our problem is this. That's really the most important part, I think, of our job. I'll also say that generative AI may not always be the best user experience for what you're trying to achieve. So if you've decided, yeah, AI is the way to go, like this can really bring some efficiency or some value to our users, don't immediately jump to generative AI. Make sure that traditional AI, right, is not a better fit for what you're trying to achieve. And I guess the last thing, I want UXers in particular to know is that you're going to find yourself in even more of a kind of ethicist role than maybe ever before. You are going to find yourself standing up for the human, right? In this experience of adopting this new technology. You're probably going to find yourself being the one that asks even more about that user's role, right, or experience in this. You might see things or feel things that could be a potential issue for a user, for a person, than the rest of your cross-functional team, right? So you're going to find yourself in this ethicist role. It doesn't mean that you have to be an expert. You don't have to be perfect, but just know that there's going to be an opportunity for you, most likely, to advocate for the human in a way that you maybe haven't before.
All right, and I wrote down a couple different things because basically we write down all these questions that we both answer independently blindly. So I put actually for both UXers and non UXers, like like I mentioned kind of earlier, this is a big shift, right? Is it as big as iPhone or internet? I don't know, but it's big enough that we can kind of relate it to that sort of level. So it's just good for everyone to come up to speed and like actually
Yeah.
try it out, right? And play around with it and try to see how to incorporate it in your job. And on that point, for UX people, I've been watching. Jacob Nielsen has been posting tons about AI on LinkedIn, and he reposted one where someone was using generative AI in in their UX research process, and I thought that was pretty fascinating. I start to my imagination starts to go wild. For instance, Katie, when we met, we started this team. There was an icebreaker when we grew the team, and the manager at the time thought that would be cool to do two truths and a lie. And because your background with law enforcement and interrogation type tech stuff, um, in psychology, you knew how to read somebody's body language. And it also made me think of, and this is AI machine learning, this isn't generative AI, but like I saw a patent by Spotify to detect somebody's mood based on the tone of their voice, basically through their phone somehow. I thought, what if you could start, reading people better than just like what they say, the attitudinal data, but if there's some way to pick up on the nonverbal and like have it help and augment. That's where my mind goes. Don't know if that exists yet, but that's kind of a cool deal. And so that's the other thing is, I think about this is a big disruptive thing, and we our jobs will be more like how do we incorporate this, and then the scary part of that too is like, okay, if it's interpreting, what if it interprets wrong or it makes
Yeah.
something up, right? It goes back to that trust and ethics. But I do think we're on something that's AI's been around for a while, um, and with generative AI, I think things have changed, and it makes me think of there's a documentary out there I watched when I was on a Delta flight once called General Magic, and we had a director, Katie, that recommended I watch this thing and think about at the time there's some transition in the company, and think about like what when there's a time and place for something. So what my takeaway from that is General Magic came up with the idea of iPhones and iPads and smart devices in the 90s, but it was based on analog technology. They were supported by telephone companies, bias there, and they missed the digital shift, and it didn't take off. But years later, we have the iPhone, the iPod turning into the iPhone, and so the idea, you know, was good. It just wasn't the right time and place. And so now that we have generative AI, I think it's becoming the right time and place for maybe some of the sci-fi things that have been out
Yeah,
there.
and I think you make a really good point too. It's like as a UXer, like I think about it as like the balance between like risk and reward too, right? So you don't want to be the person on the team that's so risk adverse and so like anti technology and change and fearful of what could happen, right? From this ethics or responsible AI perspective that you block, that you kind of become a blocker to innovation. To your point, you want to learn how it works and figure out how it can work with the user, right? How can it work within the workflow, right? How can the design be augmented to like really incorporate this new technology but still serve that overall workflow for the person? Um, so I think it's really about, to your point, incorporating it into how you understand a person's experience could be, right? And how it is now, and not to get too afraid of the things that might go wrong. Just like a healthy fear, healthy skepticism, right, if you will, about,
Yeah,
what could happen.
yeah, everything in moderation. And then,
Yeah.
so I'd like to end this vodcast with, I always like to ask for input and what people have. And I think from this conversation, the one thing that'd be really cool to have criteria around is what criteria are people thinking of for their enterprises around AI, like for the ethics or other considerations. So we've named some here. I'd love to hear from listeners. What are some other things out there that they could bring to the table? Maybe we could look at. I like to measure and have metrics. Like what do we measure against? So love to hear what people have out there for that.
Yeah. And if you're not that far along in your journey yet and you have other questions, right, about how to get started with user research or design around generative AI or AI, ask us those questions too, because we'd love to help out.